Out of the over 1,000 mounts in World of Warcraft, some of the most recognizable and famous of the bunch come from the raids and dungeons found across Azeroth and the rest of the game's worlds. This video will go over every single mount that is a drop from raids and dungeons throughout the game, totaling 61 mounts across every expansion from Classic to the War Within. Now to start off with the first dungeon mount ever introduced to the game, we have Rivendare's Death Charger, a drop from at first Lord Baron Rivendare, but now Lord Arius Rivendare, the last boss of the Stratholme Undead side with a drop chance of around 1%. Stratholme is located to the north of Eastern Plaguelands and can be attempted 10 times per hour per character, and is pretty fast to run, so this can easily be grinded non-stop with multiple characters until the mount drops. Next and onwards to the Burning Crusade, we have 4 mounts to go over. First is the Raven Lord, probably the most recognizable dungeon mount in the game, that drops from Anzu in the Sethic Halls on Heroic. The Sethic Halls are located in the east portal in the ruins of Auchindoun, in Terokkar Forest, and this mount has a drop rate just under 2% and can be attempted once a day per character. Second is the Swift Ivory Hawkstrider, that drops from Kael'thas Sunstrider, final boss of Magister's Terrace, with a 3 to 4% drop rate on Heroic. This can also only be attempted once a day per character, and the Magister's Terrace is located at the Isle of Quel'Danas, the portal to which is located in Shattrath City. Now onto another drop from Kael'thas, we have the famous Ashes of Alar from the Tempest Keep, located in Netherstorm in Outland. This mount has a drop rate just under 2%, but can also be obtained from the Black Temple Time Walking during BC Time Walking Week, with a bit higher of a drop rate than from Kael'thas, with any given Time Walking Week taking a few months to come back through the Time Walking rotation. Lastly, for the Burning Crusade, there's the Fiery Warhorse that drops from Atumen the Huntsman in Karazhan, with a drop rate around 1%. This can be attempted once per week and takes less than a minute to run, since the boss is right next to the entrance, so this one should be an easy grind to add to the list. To start off the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, with a large total of 10 mounts, we have the Bronze Drake, dropped from the Infinite Corruptor and Heroic Culling of Stratholme, found in the Caverns of Time. The Infinite Corruptor will drop this mount 100% of the time, but you have to reach him located right before the last boss in 25 minutes or less, which should be impossible not to do. Then, the next dungeon mount for Wrath is the Blue Proto-Drake, dropped from Skadi the Ruthless, last boss of the Utgard Pinnacle in the Howling Fjord, only on Heroic difficulty. This can be attempted once a day and has about a 1% drop rate. Next up is the Blue and Azure Drakes, dropped from Malygos in the Eye of Eternity. The entrance to this dungeon can be found on Kuldara in the Borean Tundra, and the mounts both have a 4% drop rate. A pretty common occurrence when farming these mounts is that you will sometimes tend to get the same mount 3 or more times in a row, which is very annoying, so be prepared for that. Then another single boss raid with 2 mounts is the Obsidian Sanctum located in Dragonblight, in which the Black and Twilight Drakes both drop from Sartharion in 10 and 25 mana respectively. These mounts both have a 100% drop rate, but only when Sartharion is killed while all 3 Drakes around the outside of the room are alive, which is very easy to do, but is required for the mounts. Next is the Grand Black War Mammoth, which drops from any boss in the Vault of Archivon, located in Wintergrasp, with a drop rate just below 1% on both 10 and 25 man. Then there's the Onyxian Drake that drops from Onyxia in Dustwallow Marsh, with a drop rate of around 1 to 2%. Following is Memoron's Head that drops from Yogg-Saron, last boss of the Ulduar raid in the Storm Peaks. This mount only drops from Yogg at a 1% drop rate when the raid is done with 0 keepers, which means you can't talk to any of the keepers after you defeat them, but this doesn't really change how you clear the raid. This can also be obtained from the Ulduar Time Walking raid, similar to the Ashes of Alar for BC, and it drops at a higher rate than normal compared to normal Ulduar. And to finish off the Wrath of the Lich King mounts, is possibly one of, if not the most recognizable and iconic mount in the game, and that is Invincible, dropped from the Lich King in 25-man Heroic Icecrown Citadel, with a drop rate less than 1%. This mount can also be obtained from Ulduar Time Walking, similar to Memoron's Head. This mount is famous not only because of the awesome look and fantastic lore it has, but also because its drop rate is extremely low, can only be attempted once per week per character. Not only that, but Icecrown Citadel can also take upwards of 20 minutes to run, so it is both time consuming and demoralizing to try and grind this mount. Now, we move on to the Cataclysm expansion, with a total of 11 mounts, with the first one being the Drake of the North Wind, which drops from Alteris, second boss of the Vortex Pinnacle, located in Oldham. This mount has a drop rate less than 1%, but similarly to Rivendare's Death Charger, can be farmed 10 times per hour, and is one of those mounts you can grind non-stop. Second is the Vitreous Stone Drake, which drops from Slabhide, second boss of the Stone Core in Deepholm. This mount also has a drop rate less than 1% and can be farmed in normal 10 times per hour. Next is the Swift Razashi Raptor and Swift Zulian Panther, which drop from Bloodlord Mandakir and High Priestess Kilnara respectively in the heroic Zul'Gurub dungeon in Stranglethorn Vale. They both have a drop rate around 1% and can only be farmed once per day. Then there is the Amani Battle Bear, which comes from the Zul-Aman dungeon in the Ghostlands. This is a recolor of the Amani Warbear from the original Burning Crusade version of Zul-Aman, and to obtain this, you have to clear the first 4 bosses in 25 minutes, with Halazi being the last. Then you talk to Kasha and release her from her cage, where she will break 3 urns, with the final having the mount 100% of the time. To start off the raids of Cataclysm, first is the Drake of the South Wind, from Alakir in the Throne of the Four Winds, located in Oldham. This mount drops on all difficulties with a drop rate of around 1%. Then we can look to the Firelands in Mount Hyjal, where you can obtain the Flame Talon of Alisrazor and the Pure Blood Firehawk from Alisrazor and Ragnaros respectively. They both have a drop rate around 2% and can be acquired from any difficulty, but can also be obtained from Firelands Time Walking during the Cataclysm Time Walking week at a higher drop rate. Finally, for Cataclysm, there are 3 mounts that can drop from the Dragon Soul raid found in the Caverns of Time. First, the Experiment 12B mount drops from Ultraxion on any difficulty with a drop rate of around 1%. Then, the Blazing Drake drops from the final boss Deathwing on all difficulties, and the Lifebinder's Handmaiden drops from him on Heroic only. These both have a drop chance of approximately 1%, and all 3 of these can be attained from the Firelands Time Walking at a higher drop rate than usual. Now we move on to the Mist of Pandaria expansion, which has no dungeon mounts but 4 raid mounts. First is the Astral Cloud Serpent, which drops from Elagon, third boss of the Mogushan Vaults in Kunlai Summit. This mount has a drop rate of around 1% and drops on any difficulty. Next is the spawn of Horadon and Clutch of Ji Kun, both from Throne of Thunder on the Isle of Thunder, and drop from Horadon and Ji Kun respectively. These both can drop on any difficulty and have a drop rate just over 2%. Lastly for the Mist of Pandaria is the Kor'kron Juggernaut, dropped by Garrosh Hellscream in the Siege of Orgrimmar raid, with the entrance being in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The mounts only drop on Mythic difficulty with a drop rate around 1%. A good thing about this mount though is that you can also farm the highly sought after Tusk of Manaroth, which are also a very rare drop for Mythic Garrosh. Next up is the Warlords of Draenor expansion, which only has 2 mounts from raids. First is the Ironhoof Destroyer, dropped from Blackhand, final boss of the Blackrock Foundry in Gorgrond. This mount has a drop rate around or less than 1%, only on Mythic difficulty. This raid and all raids moving forward also have raid skips to the end of the instance, significantly reducing the time it takes to clear these raids for mounts in Transmog. The second mount in WoD is the Fellsteel Annihilator from Mythic Archimonde, the last boss of the Hellfire Citadel raid, with a drop rate of 1% on Mythic. On to Legion, there are 7 mounts in this expansion, with 2 dungeon mounts coming from the Return to Karazhan instance. The first of these is Midnight, which drops from Atumen the Huntsman at a 1% drop rate on Mythic difficulty. The second is the Smoldering Emberworm, which drops from the Nightbane secret boss. This is obtained by clicking a series of soul fragments throughout the lower part of the instance within a certain amount of time. And when you click on all of them, you can go up to the roof where the original Nightbane fight was in the original Karazhan and fight him again. There are a ton of really helpful guides on YouTube on how to get this mount, and it's pretty easy to do, but there is a lot to explain. This mount is only obtainable on Mythic difficulty and has a 20% drop rate per person in your party. This means that if you bring 5 people, there is a 100% chance the mount drops. Additionally, the mount always drops for someone who doesn't have it, making this a really cool and easy mount to obtain. Now for Legion raids, the first two mounts come from Gul'dan, last boss of the Nighthold in Suramar. First is the Living Infernal Core that drops on any difficulty with a drop rate less than 1%. Second is the Fiendish Hellfire Core, which only drops on Mythic difficulty with a similar drop rate. Then, the Tomb of Sargeras raid on the Broken Shore has one mount, the Abyss Worm, that drops from the boss Mistress Sazine. This mount drops on all difficulties and has a drop rate around 1%. Finally for Legion, Antorus the Burning Throne on Argus has two mounts that can be obtained. First is the Antoran Charhound, which drops from the second boss, the Fellhounds of Sargeras, on any difficulty 1% of the time. Second is the Shackled Urzul, which has a 1% drop rate from the last boss, Argus the Unmaker, on Mythic difficulty. A bonus when farming this, similar to Garrosh, is that you are able to farm the Scythe of Unmaker and Tayshalak Transmog items when trying to get this mount, both of which have a 1% drop rate from Argus and Agrimar respectively. Next up is the Battle for Azeroth expansion, which has a total of 8 mounts. The first of them is the Mummified Raptor Skull, which comes from the King's Rest dungeon in Zuldazar on Mythic difficulty. This mount drops from the last boss King Dazar with around a 1% drop rate. Second is the Underrot Krog, which drops from the Unbound Abomination, the last boss of the Underrot dungeon in Nazmir. This mount has a drop rate around or less than 1%. Then there is Sharkbait from Harlan's Suite, last boss of the Freehold dungeon in Tiragar's Sound. This mount has a 1% drop rate on Mythic difficulty. Now onto Operation Mechagon, there are two mounts to obtain here. First is the Mechagon Peacekeeper, which has a 0.5% drop rate from the HK8 Aerial Oppression unit, last boss of the Junkyard section on Mythic difficulty. The second mount here is similar to the Smoldering Emberworm from before and is called the Aerial Unit R21X. This mount drops from the final boss, King Mechagon, on hard mode, which requires certain steps from the player found throughout the dungeon, which is quite easy to do with tutorials. The drop chance works the same as the Emberworm, so you have a 20% chance of it dropping solo, an additional 20% per player in the party, but only one can drop per run. For the raids of BFA, there are 3 mounts to obtain. The first two are from the Battle of Dazar Allure raid. One of these is the Gmod, which drops off of High Tinker Mechatorque on all raid difficulties with a 1% drop chance. The next is the Glacial Tidestorm, which drops from Jaina Proudmoore on Mythic difficulty with a 1% drop rate. Lastly, for Battle for Azeroth, is the Ny'alotha Allseer from N'Zoth, final boss of Ny'alotha the Waking City, the entrance to which is in Uldum. This mount has a 1% drop rate on Mythic difficulty only. Now we move on to the Shadowlands expansion with a total of 6 mounts, 3 from raids and 3 from dungeons. First up is Marrowfang, which drops from Nalthor the Rimebinder, the last boss of the Necrotic Wake dungeon in Bastion. This mount only drops on Mythic difficulty and has a drop rate less than 1%. Next is the Slime Serpent, which can be obtained from the Plaguefall dungeon in Maldraxxus. To obtain this mount, all that you have to do is solo the dungeon on Heroic or Mythic, and then walk outside the last building from where you came from, and in a pool up on the hill, the Slime Serpent will be waiting for you. This is a pretty easy mount to add to your collection, and takes about 5 minutes. Then there's the Cartel Master's Gear Glider, a drop from Soleil, the last boss of Tazavesh the Veiled Market, and this mount only drops on Mythic difficulty at a 2% drop rate. The first 2 mounts for the Shadowlands raids come from the Sanctum of Domination. First is the Sanctum Gloom Charger, which drops from the 9, the second boss of the raid. This mount can drop on all difficulties, but has a really low drop rate, less than 1%. The second is Vengeance, which drops from Sylvanas Windrunner, the last boss of the instance, on Mythic only with a drop rate of 1%. The final Shadowlands mount comes from the Sepulchre of the First Ones on Zareth Mortis. This mount is the Zareth Overseer, which drops from the Jailer at a drop rate of 1% on Mythic difficulty. The next expansion is Dragonflight, with it only having 1 unique mount obtainable from raid drops and none from dungeons. For the raid mount, we have Anu Ralos Flame's Guidance, which drops from Fyrak, the final boss of the Amir Drasil raid in the Emerald Dream. This mount has a 1% drop rate on Mythic difficulty only. Another thing in Dragonflight, which isn't a unique mount, but I still thought I would include, is the item Reigns of the Quantum Courser, which will turn into a random mount that is obtainable as a drop from dungeons, which this video has listed. This item has about a 1% drop rate from Chrono Lord Deus, last boss of the Dawn of the Infinite dungeon, on Heroic and Mythic. Also, this item will always give you a new mount, never a mount you already own. I also thought I would add in here the Infinite Time Reaver mount, which has a chance to drop from any boss from a time walking raid or dungeon. This mount has a 1 in 4,000 chance to drop, but can be farmed non-stop if you really wanted to. Now, for the most current expansion as of the making of this video, we have the War Within, of which there are 6 mounts in total. The first dungeon mount of this expansion is the Mount Wick from the Dark Flame Cleft dungeon in the Ringy Deeps. This mount drops from the last boss, the Darkness, on Mythic difficulty, with a drop rate of about 2%. Then the second dungeon mount obtainable is the Stone Vault Mech Suit, which comes from the Malfunctioning Mech Suit quest item. This item drops from Void Speaker Eirik, last boss of the Stone Vault dungeon in the Ringing Deeps, on Mythic difficulty with a 1 to 2% drop rate. 2 mounts are obtainable from Queen Ansurek, last boss of the Nirubar Palace raid. The first is the Sureki Sky Razor, which has a drop rate below 1% on all difficulties. The second is the Ascendant Sky Razor, which only drops on Mythic and currently has a 100% drop rate, with 3 dropping per kill since it is the current expansion. Once we move on to the next expansion, this mount will drop to a 1% drop rate like other Mythic raid mounts. Lastly, Trade Prince Gallywix, final boss of the Liberation of the Undermine raid, drops 2 mounts. First is the Prototype ASMR, which has a drop rate below 1% on all difficulties. The second is the Big G, which has the same loot rules as the Ascendant Sky Razor, since it is also a Mythic raid mount. And that concludes a brief overview of every single mount that drops from dungeons and raids across every expansion in World of Warcraft. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like and comment below for more. Feel free to subscribe to my channel to see more content like this. With that being said, I'm out.